The man remembered by history as the Emperor Nero was born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus on the 15th of December in the year 37 AD, at the imperial villa located in the Italian town of Antium. Nero's father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, was born sometime between 2 BC and 1 BC into the prominent Ahenobarbi clan. Although the family had originally been of the plebeian class, they had been elevated to the ruling patrician status under the reign of Augustus. The Ahenobarbi family had produced many consuls, which was the highest elected political position in the Roman Republic. Gnaeus Domitius himself held the consulship in the year 32 AD for the entirety of that year. 4 years later, after a fire swept through the Aventine district and the Circus Maximus in Rome, the Emperor Tiberius appointed him to a special commission tasked with compensating those whose property had been destroyed in the blaze. During the final months of Tiberius' reign, Gnaeus Domitius faced accusations of incest with his sister Domitia Lepida, as well as adultery with the noblewoman Albusilla. These charges were brought by the Praetorian prefect Macro. However, with the death of Tiberius and the smooth transition of power to Caligula, Gnaeus Domitius escaped prosecution. Nero's mother, Agrippina the Younger, was the daughter of Vipsania Agrippina the Elder, who was also the mother of the Emperor Caligula. This made Agrippina the Younger the great-granddaughter of Rome's first emperor, Augustus. Her father was the celebrated Roman general Germanicus, who was a member of both the Julian and Claudian clans. Agrippina therefore possessed an ancestry of considerable prestige. She was born on the 6th of November in the year 15 AD in the Rhineland settlement of Ara Ubiorum, during one of her father's military campaigns in Germania. In 28 AD, when Emperor Tiberius returned to the Italian mainland after his withdrawal to the island of Capri, modern-day Capri, he arranged for the 13-year-old Agrippina to marry Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. Their first and only child, Nero, was born 9 years later, shortly after the death of Tiberius in 37 AD. Nero's birth was accompanied by mixed omens. The delivery was extremely difficult for Agrippina, as Nero was born in a breech position. The philosopher Pliny the Elder remarked that the only person to have been born in such a way who had gone on to achieve great success was Marcus Agrippa, the Roman general and close friend of Augustus. However, as Nero was finally delivered, it was said that before his feet touched the ground for the first time, he was touched by the rays of the sun. Despite this seemingly positive sign, his horoscope was considered unfavorable. According to one astrologer, Nero was destined to become ruler, but he would one day kill his own mother. Agrippina is said to have responded to this prophecy with the words, "Let him kill me, only let him rule." When Nero was only 2 years old, he was separated from his mother in 39 AD. Agrippina had been implicated in a conspiracy against her brother, Emperor Caligula. In the aftermath of the plot, several prominent men were executed, while Agrippina and her sister Livilla were exiled. Agrippina was sent to the island of Pontia, where her elder brother had previously endured his own exile. Initially, Nero remained in the care of his father. However, Gnaeus Domitius had long been suffering from dropsy, and he died in January of 41 AD. Following his father's death, Nero went to live with his aunt, Domitia Lepida, who was the mother of the future Empress Messalina. Although Domitia cared for the young boy, his life remained austere. This was because Emperor Caligula, when exiling his sisters, had confiscated all of their property, and upon the death of Gnaeus Domitius, he also seized Nero's share of the inheritance. Nero's stay with his aunt was brief. On the 24th of January in 41 AD, Caligula was assassinated. The following day, Claudius became emperor. One of his first acts was to recall both Agrippina and Livilla from exile, restoring their confiscated property. Upon her return, Agrippina took Nero back from Domitia Lepida and appointed him appropriate tutors, placing him under the supervision of the freedmen Beryllus and Anicetus. She also began searching for a new husband. At first, Agrippina attempted to marry the distinguished General Galba, but he rejected her advances. She then turned her attention to the wealthy and older consular Passianus Crispus, who at the time was married to Domitia Lepida's elder sister, Domitia the Elder. Unlike Galba, Passienus recognized the political advantages of marrying the daughter of the famous general Germanicus. Sometime in late 41 AD, he married Agrippina. In the years 42 to 43 AD, Passienus Crispus held the prestigious position of proconsul of Asia, and in 44 AD he achieved the honor of taking his second consulship. His career and success appeared to be flourishing, but in 47 AD he died, leaving his considerable fortune to Agrippina. Ancient sources, always eager to dwell on intrigue, claimed that Agrippina had poisoned her husband after being named his sole heir. Whether there is truth to this allegation cannot be determined with certainty. The year of Passienus' death coincided with a significant milestone, the 800th anniversary of the founding of Rome. To mark the occasion, Emperor Claudius held the Grand Centennial Games. Among the spectacles was the Lusus Troiae, a ceremonial equestrian display in which both Claudius' young son Britannicus and Nero participated. Of the two boys, it was Nero who drew the warmer and more enthusiastic applause from the crowd. Some historians have suggested that this favoritism from the people may have been deliberately orchestrated by agents loyal to Agrippina to increase her son's public profile. This surge of public adulation for Nero was not received well by Empress Messalina, Claudius' wife. Rumors even circulated that Messalina had sent assassins to kill the young boy, who, according to legend, was saved by a snake. The snake's skin, so the story goes, was later fashioned into a golden bracelet for Nero to wear. Messalina had played a key role alongside her husband in eliminating those who posed a threat to his somewhat uncertain claim to the imperial throne. One of her early actions as empress had been to ensure the downfall of Agrippina's sister, Livilla, who, after a brief recall from exile in late 41 AD, was subsequently executed. It is therefore thought that, in the years between her return from exile and the death of her second husband in 47 AD, Agrippina deliberately maintained a low profile to avoid drawing Messalina's dangerous attention. As a result, her activities during the period from 41 to 47 AD are scarcely recorded in the historical record. Nevertheless, Agrippina appears to have worked quietly and strategically to promote her son's image and position. The cheers Nero received at the Centennial Games angered Messalina, but by that time her focus was elsewhere. She had begun an affair with Gaius Silius, the consul designate, and it was her alleged bigamous marriage to him in 48 AD that sealed her fate. Her execution that same year brought an end to the most significant threat to both Agrippina and Nero. It is impossible to say for certain whether Agrippina had already set her sights on marrying Claudius during this period. However, following Messalina's death, Agrippina quickly emerged as the most favored candidate for the imperial marriage among those proposed by Claudius' influential freedman advisors. In 48 AD, she had already intervened to dissolve the betrothal between Claudius' daughter, Claudia Octavia, and Lucius Junius Silanus, with the intention of having Octavia marry Nero instead. Before this could happen, however, Agrippina focused on securing her own marriage to Claudius. She enlisted the support of Lucius Vitellius, a long-standing friend and political ally of the emperor. Vitellius presented the matter to the Senate. At that time, a marriage between an uncle and his niece was considered incestuous under Roman custom, but Vitellius spoke in glowing terms of the proposed union. The Senate voted in its favor, and when Claudius appeared before the people in the forum, he was met with enthusiasm. It is said that the marriage took place that very same day, early in January of 49 AD. The engagement of Nero to Claudia Octavia soon followed. Around the same time, the philosopher and statesman Seneca was recalled from exile. This marked a remarkable reversal of fortune for Seneca, who had been banished years earlier, likely on a fabricated charge of adultery with one of Claudius' relatives. In 50 AD, Nero was formally adopted by Claudius, who was now both his stepfather and adoptive father. The following year, in March of 51 AD, the 13-year-old Nero assumed the toga virilis, the ceremonial garment marking his transition into manhood. In that same month, Claudius designated Nero to hold the consulship in the year 56 AD, granted him proconsular imperium, the authority to command outside the city, and bestowed upon him the prestigious title Princeps Juventutis, meaning first among the youth. At the same time that she worked to elevate her son's status, Agrippina acted decisively to sideline Britannicus, Claudius's natural son. She systematically removed the tutors, confidants, and allies who surrounded him. She also persuaded Claudius to return the position of Praetorian prefect to a single command, appointing Afranius Burrus to the role, a man whose loyalty was firmly aligned with her and Nero. Nero's assumption of the toga virilis marked his formal entry into public life. That same year, he made his first appearance before the Senate, delivering a speech of gratitude to Claudius. In 52 AD, when Claudius fell ill, Nero again spoke in the Senate, offering vows for the emperor's recovery and promising to hold celebratory games should he regain his health. In 53 AD, Nero addressed both the Senate and Claudius to make formal petitions. Some of these he delivered in Greek, requesting aid for various towns and cities across the empire that had suffered disasters. He also spoke in favor of restoring freedom to the island of Rhodes, a privilege Claudius had revoked in 44 AD. When Emperor Claudius left Rome to attend the annual Latin festival, Nero was appointed prefect of the city in his absence, a significant honor for someone of his age. Yet the year 53 AD would prove even more pivotal, as it marked the culmination of Agrippina's carefully orchestrated ambitions. Nero married Claudia Octavia, the daughter of Claudius. Because Nero had already been adopted by Claudius and was, in legal terms, his son, the marriage would have been considered incestuous under Roman law unless Octavia herself was first adopted into another family. Once these formalities of adoption were completed, the marriage proceeded. In celebration, the games that Nero had earlier promised to Claudius were held following the wedding ceremony. The year 54 AD began under ominous signs when a comet appeared in the sky, an event often regarded by the Romans as a harbinger of misfortune. Early in that year, charges were brought against Domitia Lepida, Nero's aunt, accusing her of practicing magic and of failing to control her slaves. It is possible that these accusations were engineered by Agrippina herself. Nero even gave evidence against his aunt, and she was executed. Domitia Lepida's death was not the only significant loss of the year. On the 13th of October, it was announced that Emperor Claudius had died. The precise cause of his death remains uncertain. Ancient sources differ. Some allege that Agrippina poisoned him with mushrooms to secure her son's succession, while others suggest that allies acting on her behalf carried out the deed. There is, however, no conclusive proof to confirm these claims. In the hours preceding the public announcement of Claudius' death, urgent preparations were made to ensure Nero's smooth accession to the throne. The Praetorian prefect Afranius Burrus returned early that morning from camp to ready the imperial guard. Following the announcement, he escorted the 16-year-old Nero out of the palace. At the foot of the steps, the Praetorian soldiers greeted the new ruler before hastily escorting him to their camp at the Viminal Gate. Once inside the camp, Nero delivered a speech prepared for him by Seneca, his tutor. The soldiers hailed him as emperor, and he took the imperial name Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. He also promised each member of the guard a generous donative, matching the amount that Claudius had given them upon his own accession. Nero was then taken to the Senate, which granted him the tribunician power and proconsular imperium. As had been customary for his predecessors, Nero initially declined the honorary title Pater Patri, Father of the Nation, only accepting it later in 56 AD. Around this time, Seneca was formally given the title Amicus Principis, Friend of the Princeps, while the freedman Barilus was appointed secretary for Greek correspondence, and Anicetus became prefect of the Misenum fleet. It had been expected that Claudius' will would be read during the Senate meeting, but it was suppressed, and its contents remain unknown. Whether Britannicus, Claudius' natural son, had been named in it in any capacity is a matter of speculation. The funeral of Claudius, arranged entirely by Agrippina, was a lavish affair. It took place 5 days after his death, allowing time for the late emperor to lie in state before being carried in solemn procession to the Campus Martius and placed upon the funeral pyre. The eulogy was delivered by Nero, though the speech was composed by Seneca. A short official period of mourning was declared. On the 19th of October, the day after the funeral, Nero appeared before the Senate and formally requested that Claudius be deified. The Senate granted the request, and preparations were made for the creation of his cult and the construction of a temple in his honor. Following this, Nero adopted the title Divi Filius, son of a god. Agrippina herself was rewarded with extraordinary honors from the Senate, including the right to be accompanied by 2 lictors, a privilege usually reserved for magistrates, and the prestigious position of priestess in the newly established cult of Claudius. For a time, imperial coinage even depicted her image alone or alongside that of her son. In the early months of Nero's reign, she is believed to have handled much of the daily administration of the empire. Nero reportedly arranged for Senate meetings to be held within the palace so that she could listen to the proceedings. Agrippina, however, remained alert to possible threats to her son's position. Not long after Nero's accession, Marcus Junius Silanus, the governor of Asia and brother of the deceased Lucius Junius Silanus, died suddenly while at dinner, possibly murdered by the equestrian procurator Sila and the freedman Helius. No one was prosecuted for the killing. By the end of that same year, Narcissus, a powerful freedman loyal to Claudius, was also dead. In the first years of his reign, Nero quickly acquired a reputation for generosity. He shared power with the Senate, abolished secret political trials, and presented himself as a benevolent ruler. Yet in practice, he largely left the actual business of governance in the hands of 3 principal advisers: his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, the praetorian prefect Afranius Burrus, and his politically astute mother, Agrippina. Seneca, the prefect Burrus, and also his mother Agrippina held significant influence during the early years of Nero's reign. However, in the year 55 AD, Agrippina's image was removed from the imperial coinage. Seneca had been encouraging Nero to become more independent from his domineering mother, which provoked her resentment. In response, Agrippina began to promote her stepson Britannicus as the rightful heir to the throne. She also strongly objected to Nero's romantic involvement with Poppaea Sabina, who at the time was married to a friend of his. Although Nero had openly praised Claudius in his speech before the Senate, he nevertheless took steps to distance himself from his adoptive father. He repealed measures such as the requirement that quaestor designates public officials finance games from their own funds, and he revived the Cintian law, ensuring that advocates received no payment whatsoever from defendants, instead of the 10,000 sesterces permitted under Claudius. Agrippina was angered by these actions, but Nero was not deterred. Nero also began to emphasize his connection to his biological father, Domitius Ahenobarbus. He requested that the Senate grant his father a statue and arranged for his birthday to be commemorated each year outside Nero's residence. Further signs of tension emerged when, in the year 55 AD, Nero entered into an affair with a former slave, Claudia Act, and even threatened to divorce Octavia. Although he did not go as far as a formal separation, he lived openly with Claudia Act, which greatly displeased his mother. Reportedly, Seneca assisted Nero in concealing the relationship at first, enlisting the prefect Serenus to pose as Claudia Act's lover. While this may have convinced the public, Agrippina was not fooled, and she could not restrain herself from making sharp, insulting remarks toward the woman. Adding to Agrippina's frustration, Pallas, the former slave who had long been her ally, was dismissed from his position by Nero. That same year, Nero's adopted brother Britannicus died. Ancient sources claim that Nero employed the poisoner Locusta, supposedly the same individual who had supplied the toxin that killed Claudius, after he became suspicious of Britannicus. In a scene that echoed Claudius' final hours, the poison was said to have been administered during a dinner party. When its effects began to show, Nero announced that Britannicus was experiencing one of his epileptic seizures and would soon recover. However, Britannicus was carried away on a stretcher, died shortly afterward, and was cremated the very next day. The alleged motive for the poisoning was Agrippina's threat to champion Britannicus over her own son when relations between her and Nero had soured. Yet, as with Claudius' death, the charge of murder cannot be conclusively proven. While ancient accounts consistently speak of foul play, modern historians remain skeptical. Since it is well documented that Britannicus did indeed suffer from epilepsy, It remains possible that his death was the result of natural causes. After Britannicus' death, Agrippina attempted to strengthen her position. She forged an alliance with his sister, Claudia Octavia, as well as with other wealthy and influential figures and some members of the lower ranks of the Praetorian Guard. This was despite having lost the support of Burrus earlier after insulting him. Nero, realizing her strategy, acted quickly to counter it. He gained favor with the Praetorian Guard by granting them free distributions of grain. Nero took his efforts further by expelling his mother from the imperial palace, claiming that her formal morning greeting, known as the salutatio, was too disruptive. Agrippina moved into the former residence of her grandmother, Antonia, located on the Palatine Hill. To further reduce her influence, Nero reorganized the duties of the Praetorian Guard in such a way that she lost access to the guards assigned to her and those stationed around the palace. These reforms were presented as general military efficiency measures, so they could not be openly identified as targeted actions against his mother. In addition to losing the Praetorian Guard's protection, Agrippina also had the Germanic bodyguards assigned to her removed shortly after Nero's accession. Seizing upon her estrangement from the emperor, and motivated by personal grievances, Junia Silana, the former wife of Gaius Silius, and Nero's aunt, Domitia the Elder, joined forces against Agrippina. At this time, Nero was still on good terms with his aunt. One of her former slaves, the actor Paris, allegedly brought formal charges of maestas, crimes against the emperor, against Agrippina and Rubellius Plautus, the great-grandson of Tiberius. Nero, upon hearing these accusations, panicked and immediately ordered the execution of his mother. However, Prefect Burrus agreed to carry out the order only if the charges against Agrippina could only proceed if they were proven, and therefore she was granted a formal hearing. She was interrogated the following day by Burrus, in the presence of Seneca and a number of freedmen serving as witnesses. Agrippina presented her defense and was later heard by Nero himself, who ultimately concluded the matter by dismissing the accusations against her. Although Nero chose to show clemency towards his mother, he was not so forgiving towards those who had acted against her. Junia Silana was sent into exile, while several others were condemned to death. Away from the turmoil within his own family and the daily responsibilities of governing the empire, many of which at this time were likely delegated to his advisors, Seneca and Burrus, Nero continued to pursue his personal interests in the arts and athletic competitions. He maintained his daily lessons on the kithara, a type of lyre, composed songs, and studied poetry. He greatly enjoyed the spectacle of chariot racing, but he did not care for gladiatorial combat, forcing himself to watch the contests only when necessary. During the nights, Nero would wander the streets of Rome in disguise, visiting taverns and engaging in unruly behavior with his companions. At first these escapades may have been relatively harmless, but over time they escalated into acts of violence. On one occasion, the senator Julius Montanus apologized after striking Nero during one of these nocturnal incidents, unaware of his identity, but was later driven to commit suicide out of shame. In another case, Faustus Sulla was exiled after Nero, mistakenly believing Sulla had attempted to ambush him, took punitive action against him. In the year 56 AD, a new piece of legislation was introduced in the Senate concerning the rights of freedmen. The proposal sought to grant patrons the legal right to return disrespectful freedmen to slavery, an idea that met with considerable support. However, before passing the measure, the Senate consulted Nero. Most likely guided by the advice of Seneca and Burrus, Nero wrote to the Senate expressing his view that, since freedmen held important roles in Roman society, their collective rights should not be diminished. Instead, he argued, each case should be judged individually on its own merits. The Senate accepted his recommendation. Nero held his second consulship in 57 AD and initiated the construction of an expensive amphitheater in the Campus Martius. Its foundations were made of stone and faced with marble, while the superstructure was built of wood. A sky-blue awning, decorated with stars, was stretched overhead to provide shade. His spending was not limited to construction projects. Ever eager to increase his popularity through generosity, Nero distributed a gift of 400 sestoses to each citizen of Rome. In the following year, during his third consulship, complaints reached Nero from farmers and harbor workers regarding the indirect taxes collected by the publicani, or tax contractors. At first Nero proposed abolishing all indirect taxes across the empire, but was eventually persuaded not to do so. Instead, he issued an edict to all provincial governors and to the urban praetor of Rome, ordering that any legal cases brought against the publicani were to be given priority in the courts. In another demonstration of generosity, Nero provided substantial financial assistance to 3 senators who had fallen below the minimum wealth requirement for membership in the Senate, enabling them to retain their seats. Perhaps partly because of this generosity and his good relationship with the Senate, they offered him the consulship for life, which he declined. In the same year, the notorious prosecutor Suilius Rufus faced charges for his conduct during the reign of Emperor Claudius. Rufus had been notorious for initiating numerous prosecutions, and it was his activities that had led Gaius Silius to raise the matter of reviving the Cinician law, which prohibited defendants from paying orators to plead their cases. Appearing before Nero, Rufus argued that his actions had been carried out on the orders of the late emperor. However, when no such orders were found in Claudius's records, Rufus changed his claim, stating that the instructions had come from Empress Messalina. This explanation was not challenged but nevertheless failed to save him, and he was sent into exile. Of all the events of 58 AD, perhaps the one that most occupied Nero's attention was his infatuation with Poppaea Sabina, a noblewoman married to a member of the Roman aristocracy. Some sources claim that her marriage to Otho was merely a pretense, designed to disguise her affair with the emperor until Nero could divorce his wife, Claudia Octavia. Whatever the truth, Otho was soon appointed governor of Lusitania, modern-day Portugal and part of Spain, where he remained until the end of Nero's reign, leaving the emperor free to pursue his relationship with Poppaea. Agrippina, however, strongly opposed the idea of Nero divorcing Octavia, as divorce was frowned upon in Roman society. Angered by his mother's resistance, and suspecting that she was plotting to murder him, Nero resolved to have her killed. Yet, eliminating his mother would prove to be far from a simple matter. Nero enlisted the assistance of the freedman Anicetus, who commanded the fleet stationed at Misenum and who also harbored a personal dislike for Agrippina. According to the sources, the first plan Anicetus conceived involved installing a mechanism in the ceiling of Agrippina's bedchamber. This device would loosen the supports at a chosen moment, causing the entire ceiling to collapse upon her as she slept, killing her instantly. However, it appears that this plot was somehow leaked, and as a result, it had to be abandoned. It was then that a new and more elaborate idea was devised: the construction of a specially designed trick boat that would collapse or sink with Agrippina aboard. Yet, given the mechanical implausibility of such a craft, many historians believe that ancient writers may have been confused or exaggerating in their accounts of the incident. Regardless, the plan was set in motion to be carried out during the festival of the goddess Minerva while Nero was staying at the luxurious resort of Baiae. Feigning a desire for reconciliation, Nero sent an invitation to his mother to join him there. Agrippina accepted the invitation and traveled by ship from Antium to Baiae. On the night of her arrival, Agrippina dined with her son, who displayed every outward sign of warmth and affection toward her. When the banquet concluded, Nero personally walked her to the shore, where the specially prepared vessel awaited. Once on board, Agrippina reclined casually beside her friend Acerronia, unaware of the danger. At a predetermined moment, the weighted canopy above them collapsed. One of Agrippina's attendants was killed instantly, but the section designed to trap and sink Agrippina herself failed to operate properly. Nevertheless, Agrippina and Acerronia were thrown into the water. In the confusion, Acerronia cried out for help, claiming to be Agrippina in the hope of securing assistance, but this ruse led to her being struck and killed by the crew. Ancient accounts differ as to what happened next. In one version, Agrippina, though injured, swam to shore unaided. In another, she was rescued by fishermen who brought her to land. Either way, she managed to return to her villa at Bauli. There, pretending ignorance of any foul play, she sent a messenger to Nero to inform him of the terrible accident that had occurred. Nero, however, was horrified to learn that his mother had survived the assassination attempt. Determined to finish the deed, he sent 3 men to her villa under the cover of night. Confronted by her killers, Agrippina is said to have met their gaze without fear. Before receiving the fatal blow, she reportedly bared her abdomen and commanded them to strike the womb that had borne Nero. She was slain on the spot. Officially, Agrippina was declared a traitor to the state. She was denied a public funeral and her body was hastily cremated, with her ashes buried in an unmarked grave. She was only 43 years old at the time of her death. The act greatly damaged Nero's reputation, and public opinion never fully recovered in his favor. According to tradition, Nero was haunted by the memory of his crime. He withdrew to Naples, where a letter, composed by his advisor Seneca, was sent to the Senate. In it, Nero accused Agrippina of having sought supreme power for herself, of attempting to corrupt the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard, the Roman people, and the Senate, and of being responsible for the various scandals of the reign of Emperor Claudius. He also claimed she had plotted to kill him following the supposed accident at sea. Rather than condemn Nero, the Senate received the news with apparent relief. They expressed gratitude for what they saw as the removal of a dangerous threat and even voted to hold annual games in honor of the goddess Minerva to commemorate the supposed foiling of Agrippina's conspiracy. When Nero returned to Rome in June, the city greeted him with celebrations reminiscent of a Roman triumph. He proceeded to the Capitoline Hill, where sacrifices were offered to the great Capitoline Triad, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, as well as to Mars Ultor, the Avenger, symbolizing a victory over Rome's enemies. In public, there appeared to be little resentment toward Nero for his mother's death, and even isolated acts of satire, such as graffiti and a comedic farce performed by an actor named Datus, were tolerated with leniency. Nero also took the opportunity to reverse some of his mother's past political actions. Those who had been exiled during Agrippina's time as the wife of Claudius were allowed to return. The ashes of Lollia Paulina, the former wife of Emperor Caligula, were brought back to Italy and placed in a newly built tomb. Now entirely free from the restraint of his mother's influence, Nero gave himself over more completely to his passions and extravagances. He began spending lavishly and openly participating in public performances as both a poet and a player of the lyre. He even encouraged members of the aristocracy to take up dancing lessons, behavior that many Romans considered scandalous and unworthy of the elite. The Gaianum, an arena built by Caligula on the far side of the city, was adapted so that Nero could practice and compete in chariot races away from the public eye. It is thought that this arrangement was encouraged by his advisors, Seneca and Burrus, in an effort to channel his energies into pursuits considered more socially acceptable for a man of his position. However, word soon spread of these private chariot races, and large crowds began gathering to watch and cheer for the young emperor. Emboldened by this apparent popularity, Nero established the Juvenalia, or Youth Games, to mark the ceremonial shaving of his first beard, a significant rite of passage in Roman culture. For the occasion, he had a private theatre built in gardens across the Tiber River. The games began after a solemn dedication ceremony at the Temple of Jupiter, during which Nero's shorn hair was placed in a golden casket and deposited in the temple as an offering. Attendance at the Juvenalia was strictly by invitation, ensuring that Nero would be met with a warm and enthusiastic reception as he performed before the carefully selected audience. Nero was deeply devoted to music, poetry, and the playing of the lyre. However, he was not the only one to take part in performances. Many of the invited members of the nobility, both men and women, also stepped onto the stage to showcase their talents. During that same year, a group of equestrians was formed who would become known as the Augustiani. These individuals served as the emperor's companions, following him closely and enthusiastically praising and applauding his every action. It was likely around the time of the Juvenalia that Nero also organized the Ludi Maximi, a grand series of theatrical plays dedicated to celebrating the eternal glory of the empire. At this spectacular event, special tokens were thrown into the audience. These tokens could be exchanged for a wide variety of prizes, which ranged from jewels, slaves, and horses, to, in some extraordinary cases, entire houses.